Alright guys, it's Cavalier Signature here, and this is, for all intents and purposes, the final installment of my Bakugan Battle Brawlers review saga, just for Season 1, of course. Now I know what you're probably thinking, haven't you already covered, the first 52 episodes, what are you going to be doing now? Well, if you recall from the last video, I mentioned something along the lines of me having to go and do some form of video-less recap of the series, and that's kind of what's going on here. I'm basically just going to do a sort of free-running / free-for-all recap where I just kind of give my final thoughts and conclusions on the series from beginning to end, more or less. And I'm not going to use any clips because there's not really much of a need for it, per se. And this one's going to be a little bit different than usual because I'm not really doing this without any real script. I'm kind of just sort of going off the wall here, so I may stumble on a few words or phrases here and there, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm trying to test out sort of a different method just for this specific kind of finale recap, so just bear with me for a second. So I'm going to start off by sort of giving what my impressions were on the first season in general, and then I think I might go about maybe the basic plot, and then some final thoughts. So, going back to my first impressions, I remember when I was a kid, first off, I'm going back to my childhood. When I was a kid and I first kind of saw this show, I was kind of curious about it because I didn't really know what to think about it because it was something that was kind of brand new. And as I started kind of watching it, I thought to myself, this is actually some really interesting shit we have going on right here. It's kind of like sort of like a pseudo mix, sort of a hybrid between Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! Between, using the balls and the cards. So I thought to myself, I could really get into this, And the funny thing is, when I first got into the show, I didn't get in right when the show premiered. I kind of like started watching the show maybe about somewhere around 10 to 20 episodes in. I didn't start watching it from the very first episode because for one reason or another I kind of missed some of it. So like I said, I didn't watch it right from the very beginning. I watched it around, like I said, somewhere around episodes 10 to 20 because I think like one of my first memories of this show was like something about it might have been Dan fighting Masquerade. I vaguely remember seeing Delta Dragonoid, so I kind of missed the part where he sort of evolved firsthand, but that's neither here nor there. But like I said, as a kid, I was very enthralled by it. I thought it was a really compelling story, and in some ways, I think I actually kind of enjoyed watching it a little bit more than I liked watching Pokemon. Not that I didn't like watching, the Pokemon anime series, as it is one of my favorite anime and video game series, period. But the reason why I kind of like Bakugan a little bit more was because unlike Pokemon, where the same thing kind of happens every episode, and then eventually kind of hits the reset button where the same thing kind of happens all over again, Bakugan had more of an actual plot. It had details. It had an actual arc. There was a clear and definite beginning, middle, and end, and you could definitely tell by watching as they were going further and further that the story was progressing over and over and over, and that things were coming from, the beginning to the middle to the end. So it didn't have like that same sort of loopiness, I guess you could say that Pokemon had, where, like I said, it was very, very repetitive. Same things always happening, same character, different names, same storyline, just different, just different characters here and there. Here it's like you knew exactly what was going on, and it was very clear when things were starting to kind of kick up a little bit more so in terms of plot, character development, and storytelling. Now, going on to the actual plot of the show, I thought that the plot of the first season, just from going from like beginning to end, I thought that the plot was pretty good. I thought that it was a very unique and kind of compelling plot, because usually, more times than not, in these kind of card game / shonen type or monster battle type shows, usually, at least from what I've observed, is that generally speaking, it's the human characters, more times than not, that served the role as the main antagonist, using the creatures for their own evil, nefarious purposes. But in this case, it was kind of more the other way around, where for the most part, the biggest and primary antagonist of the show was a Bakugan itself in the form of Naga. He was the one who orchestrated pretty much the events of the entire show, from him trying to obtain the Infinity Core, Silent Core, trying to dominate the universe. He was the one who turned Alice's grandfather into Hal G. He also, by proxy, turned Alice into Masquerade, who then used, his own Bakugan, his abilities to brainwash others and try to, conquer the world and so on and so forth. But for the most part, even though there were a few human antagonists here and there, they did kind of follow, generally the same sort of anime rule of, defeat equals friendship, and, reforming from being, good to bad, bad to good, so on and so forth. But, even despite all that, no, like, the big antagonist the whole time was a Bakugan. It was one of the fictitious creatures. It wasn't a person. There wasn't anyone using Naga or manipulating Naga, to try to, for their own nefarious goals. No, Naga was his own being. And even though Naga was not really seen and didn't have really too much development in terms of, from the beginning to end, because all we really know about him was, he was one of the white ones. He was a race of Bakugan that didn't have an attribute and didn't have any power. So he wanted to get power so that he wouldn't be powerless and wouldn't have to die out, being a nobody. He was just a power-hungry lunatic who couldn't accept his own fate, wanted to defy his own nature and his destiny, and it ended up destroying him and backfiring on him time and time again, leading to his ultimate death. And even though, like I said, he may not have had too much development, I do think that the basic concept that I just described a moment ago, I think that in a way that is pretty compelling, because as people, we do kind of sort of have it in ourselves that we want to rise above our stations, and sometimes people, even though you might be put in a situation you don't want to be, most people never really want to accept a grim or dreary situation, and will do everything they can in order to get out of it, and to try to elevate themselves into a higher position, regardless of how much it may cost or how difficult it may be. So in a strange way, Naga could be seen as an analogy to people who are always striving for more, but in the bad sense of people who can never just accept certain things and always need more and more and more, no matter what. So yeah, that's kind of sort of how I feel about Naga. And as for Hal G, I kind of had the same feelings about Hal G, in that how he wasn't really someone or something that was really developed that much. He made a few appearances here and there, but really he was nothing more than really just sort of Naga's messenger / lackey. He never really did anything except, pop up a few times and just say, oh, you need to do this or you need to do that to Masquerade here or there. He only really kind of had prominence in the last couple episodes when, he was like part of Naga's force, and when he brought out those like 5 Paladin Bakugan. But other than that, he didn't really do too much, and he was almost really largely unimportant. I mean, now even though Hal G may not have been important, his alter ego, Dr. Michael, was far more important, because it was his experiments and his inventions is what led to, majority of the plot happening. So, it's sort of ironic how, like, you have like a dual personality, split personality character where one alter ego has little to no relevance or importance in terms of what they've done, but you have the other side that was important. So there is sort of a weird irony going on there. And as for Masquerade, he was by far the best part of the show for me. His look, his design was really cool. The whole enigmatic mask thing going on, it was really intimidating. And the fact that he was like the greatest brawler, on the planet, up until Dan beat him in their final showdown, it was really interesting. And unlike, most shows where, the villain usually, sometimes decides, oh, I'll do it myself, Masquerade decided to sort of go the more practical route and just send a bunch of minions after, Dan and the Brawlers over and over and over as much as he could until eventually, they kept losing one by one. And then he decided he would take matters into his own hands and decide that he needs to finish them once for all. Obviously, he never got the chance because Dan did defeat him, but I still think that he was definitely a very compelling antagonist, and he was definitely one that I enjoyed very much throughout the show. And the revelation of him being Alice, like I said, it blew my mind as a kid. It shocked the hell out of me. Like, I could not believe that was something that they would do. And like I said, even though in hindsight it was probably very obvious, the clues and the hints are all there if you just go back and watch. But back then, I had no idea. I sure as hell was not smart enough to think of that. Couldn't even conceive it, let alone figure it out. So I remember being very blown by it. And in terms of, let's see, what would I have to go on next? I guess for other antagonists, we also do have, the sense of the gatekeepers that Naga made the hybrid Bakugan. As for them, I thought that they were really interesting. They were also another one of my favorite parts of the show because, like I've said before, the idea of a dual attributed Bakugan was something that was not done at the time yet. It did become more prominent in some of the later seasons, but, that's a story for another day. And, the idea that these Bakugan were made as hybrid versions of different attributes, it was pretty badass. The idea that they were Naga's sort of elite guard and that they were the most powerful Bakugan kind of at the time, I really thought that was one of the coolest things they could have done back then. Like, rather than just facing off against, 6 Bakugan of, one attribute, they made, two of dual attributes for 3 times over, and, they didn't really have too much personality, and their basic motivation was just, we're Naga's personal bodyguards, you're our enemy, we have to destroy you, rawr, 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 and they all ended up dying with the exception of, Tricoid and Rebeater, who was the only 2 that were really not that malicious or evil to begin with, so that's about that. And now that I'm kind of done sort of talking about the antagonists, now I can kind of talk about the protagonists, so to speak. So, as for the Brawlers, I'm going to start off with Dan, given that he's the main hero. So, I remember how in the beginning of the show, Dan kind of started off as sort of a cocky, hot-headed, arrogant type brawler who thought he could take on anyone, anywhere, anytime, any place, regardless of context or circumstances. And, even though he kind of had a bit of a name for himself, being the protagonist and all, he did get his ass handed to him quite a few times, during the show's run. And it kind of shows how, like I said, unlike in other shows where they kind of make the main character, the hero, just sort of invincible for no other reason than they're the protagonist. Now, Dan definitely got his ass handed to him a good few times, and even got sent to the Doom Dimension that one time, which was definitely something I didn't expect coming all the way back then. And as the show progressed, Dan became more mature, he became smarter, more clear-headed, calm. He became a much more refined and mature battler. And even though he kind of retained maybe a little bit of his old traits, even in the later parts of the show, it was pretty interesting seeing how he progressed from being, like I said, cocky, hot-headed, immature, and brash, to being much smarter and being a much better, character, and also being like a true leader to his team. And as for some of the other brawlers, for the most part, I can't really go too much into really about Bruno, Julie, and Marucho, because they kind of, for all intents and purposes, kind of stayed the same throughout the whole show. Nothing really changed significantly about them, so I'm not really going to go too much on their progression, because they're kind of the same people for more or less. I mean, they're a little bit smarter, a little bit stronger, but they never really had any real drastic changes the way I could say Dan did. Although I will say that the 2 characters out of them who did have some big changes would definitely have to be Shun and Alice. I'll start off with Shun first by saying how at the beginning of the show, Shun went from being, your stock edgy shonen rival where, he was just sort of a loner type character, didn't think that he needed anybody, thought he could take care of everything by himself, he was kind of his own guy, didn't want help, didn't want friends, didn't need this, didn't need that. But as the show went on, he went from being, sort of a cold-hearted, sort of arrogant type of guy to becoming more warm-hearted, open-minded, and being far more accepting and open to, embracing, his friendship with his team, embracing, working together with other people, and just being a more open and social guy for all intents and purposes. So Shun definitely had some progression going on, in the show as well, especially given the whole context about how, his mother died, or I guess in the English version, went into a coma. I still don't really know why they changed that, but I guess they probably just thought it'd be too hard on the kids. But, different story, I digress. And the other character, like I said, Alice, she also had kind of a bit of a progression. She also had a pretty drastic change too, because the entire run of the show, up until the last few seasons, Alice never battled, never fought in a single battle. Not once. Even though she was said to have, more expertise and knowledge on the game than anybody else, and be essentially the smartest and most competent strategic battler, she was never shown battling at all. So it's kind of strange how it's like, how could a character who never really battled know so much about it and be so knowledgeable on the game? And it was shown how she had sort of very shy, demure demeanor. Try saying that 3 times fast. But yeah, she had a very shy demeanor. It went from being sort of this very sort of sweet, kindly young girl to being much stronger, a little bit more confident, near the end of the show. And I think that, like I said, with the whole revelation of her being Masquerade really played a huge factor into that. Because once she kind of realized that this whole time I was this bad man, who's been hurting all these people and causing so many problems, it really threw her in for a loop and caused her a lot of emotional / psychological damage, making her feel as though she was a horrible person and she never wanted anything to do with Bakugan, as a result of her fear of being like Masquerade all over again. But when she managed to overcome her fear and conquer it, she decided that she can now battle as a stronger, fiercer, better person. So I will say that Alice also had a pretty interesting development from being kind of a non-action, just sort of, inspirational cheer-on girl to being, like, basically, for all intents and purposes, like the second or third strongest battler in the world, given the whole Masquerade alter ego sort of thing going on. So Alice definitely had a very interesting sort of character arc and progression. When you really look back on it, it may not have been, as upfront as Dan's or Shun's, but when you really think about it and go back and watch it, knowing the knowledge of her being Masquerade, it really adds a lot to it, in my opinion. And I think what I'll last kind of go on for before I try to conclude this is probably just the story in general. Because like I said, we kind of started off with the whole Naga trying to take control of the universe, only to screw it up and cause, the Bakugan to cross over to the human world. And like I said, it was an interesting concept about, because usually in most forms of anime that kind of go like that kind of have this concept of, creatures and humans, fictitious creatures, monsters. Usually they kind of all live in the same world. Like in the Pokemon world, there's no Pokemon dimension. They just all, the Pokemon and humans live in the same world, the same universe. And I think the same goes for most of the other ones. It's usually like they kind of all exist in the same world, but no, here it was firmly established that they come from 2 completely different dimensions that should have never come together in the first place. And the idea of, humans befriending Bakugan, using them as, for sport, as well as befriending them, and the Brawlers using theirs to try to save the world, it was a compelling arc. And I remember, like I said, I remember thinking it was very interesting how when Dan got thrown into the Doom Dimension, one of my favorite arcs of the show was, the 6 legendary soldiers, where the Brawlers each had to pass their own individual arc, or test, in order to, free themselves out of the Doom Dimension and release all the Bakugan that had been imprisoned there. It was kind of interesting to see them sort of have to win their freedom and pass their test, which ended with, all of their Bakugan evolving. I also find it interesting about the concept of evolution, because unlike in Pokemon, where almost every Pokemon has the capacity to evolve, majority of them do, here in Bakugan, it was only really a select few, and it was just the main character's Bakugan, so there wasn't some So it wasn't like a huge mystery because you just kind of know, like, oh, the only ones that evolved are the ones belonging to the main characters and, the bad guy and a few villains here and there. So I found it kind of interesting how they sort of handled the whole evolution concept. And like I said, and I think the other arc that I thought when the story really also picked up was after Dan defeated Masquerade and when the Brawlers decided they need to head to Vestroia in order to stop Naga for good. That was probably like when the show really started picking up. I mean, I think, in my opinion, it really picked up when the whole Dan got sent to the Doom Dimension. But once they decided to head to Vestroia in order to confront Naga for good, I was, I was like really in for the ride. I remember thinking about, oh man, they're going to actually visit the Bakugan's homeworld and they're going to see what it's like, where they live in, only to find that, it was a sort of twisted, distorted version caused by, Naga's, evil influence and the disruptions he made to the natural order of things, and then seeing them, come back to Earth in order to face off against Naga's biggest, biggest generals, and to face down Naga himself, only for the Brawlers to unite as a team in order to beat him. It was a really fun ride to watch. I remember being really on the edge of my seat back then. Like, I couldn't wait, week after week until, as the episodes went by. And I also had to kind of go on about the whole, one thing I also forgot, I guess I should have gone into, was the whole concept of Drago and Wyvern. In my opinion, I think that the relationship between Drago and Wyvern should have been kind of elaborated on just a little bit more. Because even though we do know that they were old lovers, and that, the reason why Wyvern loved Drago so much is because he never really judged her and never had any sort of animosity towards her for her status as being a powerless, attributeless Bakugan. We never really got to see too much in terms of like romantic developments between the two of them, and they only really had maybe a few minutes, didn't really have too much screen time together. Now I'm sure in the Japanese version it was probably a little bit different, and I'm sure it might have gone a little deeper into like, how their relationship sort of evolved over the course of things. But if I'm just talking about the English version, that whole thing wasn't really conveyed like too vividly. So I feel like they could have expanded on that just a little bit more. Although, like I said earlier, the whole plot point of Drago having to destroy Wyvern in order to obtain the Infinity Core from her, it was a really heartbreaking moment, and it did make me very sad when I was a kid. Like, just seeing, the hero have to kill someone he cared about, for the greater good, that's always a hard thing to watch. So it definitely was a bit of a gut punch to me, even back in the day, even when I didn't have even if I didn't have like the most emotional attachment. So it was a very hard thing to watch. And I think what I would have to say a little bit more about that is that even though in the end, it was a fun ride, like I said, there were, a few small things they could have changed it for it to have been better. Like I said, maybe take out a few of the sort of strange English dub translations and change some of the things back into their original Japanese version. Personally, I've never really understood why, anime feels the need to kind of change things so much just for the English release. I mean, I understand that there are some things where it's like, it's a little bit too much, but, personally, I feel like none of the things that really happened in this show, like in terms of the Japanese version, were so extreme or were so insane as to where they couldn't have just kept it for the English version, or I feel like it would have added a lot more weight to the story if they kept some of the hardships, some of the crazier, or some of the more harsher aspects of the Japanese version in the English version. That's probably my biggest criticism, and that's more of a criticism I kind of have of most anime in general. I don't like when they do those kind of things, because in my opinion, it really waters down and detracts from the weight and the severity of certain issues. But, like I said, it is sort of a common problem, and I'm not pinning that on the show itself, because, like I said, it is sort of a common thing that most animes do. So I won't hold it against them. But with all that said and done, I do think that Bakugan Battle Brawlers Season 1 was a very solid season. It was fun. It was entertaining. It was very humorous, and it was very humorous and hilarious at times. It definitely gave me a good laugh here and there when I needed to. And in ways that I couldn't even expect. More times than not. And like I said, I would definitely recommend it. If you're like a fan of classic anime, if you're like a fan, or if you've never watched it, it's definitely worth giving just a watch, just to kind of see what it was like. If I had to sort of like give it a rating, at least for the first season, out of 10, I would probably give it somewhere about maybe 6 to 7, maybe 7.5 out of 10 at the max. It's definitely not like 8, 9, or 10 worthy. I would never go that far with it, because there's definitely things that are like far better, just because, that's just kind of life. And just because, there's been so many other shows that have come, so many other animes that have come out in the, in the intervening years. So, but like I said, 6 to 7.5 out of 10. And it's definitely worth just watching just for, just for a good time, for your laughs, and just for a little bit of, sort of mind-numbing, repetitive entertainment. And like I said, I'm going to start doing and reviewing the new Vestroia series sometime in the future. I can't exactly give like a full timetable on when I'm going to do that per se, but once I sort of get things sorted out, I'll definitely let you know, in either another video or in some post or something. I'll figure it out as it goes along, and I'll let you guys know when I figure it out. But I think before I even do that, there's also a good chance that I might cover the video games that were also based around Bakugan for the first season specifically, so that I'll make sure that the games I cover go by season to season as they were released. So I think I'll do like a few Bakugan video games first, then the new Vestroia season, and that's how it's probably going to pan out. And I can't wait to discuss, the next series and the next episodes and so on and so forth as this series continues. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and until then, see you guys. Oh, and by the way, Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that you had a really good year. I hope that you guys had a good time. I hope you guys got to enjoy, the time off with your family, friends, lovers, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever you want to, whatever you want, whatever you like. And I really hope that this new year, 2022, is going to be a lot better than the years we've gotten so far. But I know one thing for sure, I'm definitely going to keep up doing these reviews, playing some games, and uploading as much stuff as I can just to hopefully entertain you guys to some degree. So, Happy New Year to you all. Hope you had a good time. And until then, see you guys.